So, here's my story. It's a bit of a roller coaster, so buckle up. My name is Mike, 35, and my wife, Jessica, 32, have been married for about 6 years. We don't have any kids, which I guess is a blessing in disguise considering what's happened. We live in a cozy house in a quiet suburb, and up until recently, I thought everything was pretty much perfect. Jessica works in marketing, and her job requires her to travel a bit. That's where things start to get interesting. She's always been someone who loves chatting with people, and that's how she ended up getting close to one particular taxi driver, Nick. Nick, from what she told me, was this charming guy who always had a funny story or a unique perspective on things. He was her regular driver for airport trips, and over time their rides turned into more than just rides. I didn't think much of it at first. She'd often mention how Nick gave her a ride again, and how they chatted about this and that. Honestly, I thought it was great she had someone to talk to during those long drives. But then, she started using his services more frequently, even for trips around town. Again, I didn't see the red flag. Maybe I should have, but I trusted her. She started coming home later than usual, saying she went for drinks with some coworkers or had late meetings. Sometimes she'd smell like a bar, but she always had a plausible excuse. I worked long hours myself, so I didn't notice anything unusual about her being busy or out late. It wasn't until a few months ago that I began to get suspicious. Jessica's phone was always buzzing, and she'd giggle at messages and hide her screen when I walked by. I chalked it up to work stress and her trying to unwind with her friends. One night she was out late again, and I decided to surprise her with a homemade dinner. I waited and waited, and she didn't come home until past midnight. When she finally did, she was flustered and had lipstick smudged on her cheek. I asked her where she'd been, and she snapped at me, saying she was with her boss discussing an important project. The more I pressed, the more defensive and hysterical she got. She accused me of not trusting her and being paranoid. Things cooled down after that, but the nagging feeling didn't go away. I started noticing how often she'd request Nick's services, and how she'd always look excited before her trips. She even started dressing up more, wearing the sexy outfits she hadn't worn in years. One day, I was cleaning the living room and found a receipt from a fancy restaurant tucked under the couch. It was for 2 people, dated the night she had claimed to be working late. When I confronted her, she had a flurry of excuses, each one less believable than the last. She said it was for a business dinner that ran late, and then tried to turn the tables on me, saying I was being controlling and obsessive. I let it go, not wanting to cause a fight, but my gut told me something was seriously wrong. The breaking point came when I found a necklace under our bed that I hadn't given her. When I asked her about it, she said it was a gift from a friend. I didn't buy it. That's when I decided to follow her. The next time she called Nick for a ride, I discreetly tailed them. Sure enough, they didn't go to her office or any meeting. They went to a secluded park and stayed there for hours. I couldn't see what they were doing, but I had a pretty good idea. My heart sank. This was the woman I loved. The woman I thought I knew. This is where everything really starts to fall apart. After my little detective mission, I couldn't shake the image of Jessica and Nick at that park. My mind was racing, filled with anger, sadness, and a sense of betrayal. I decided I needed more concrete proof before confronting her. So I did what any suspicious spouse might do. I started snooping. Jessica had always been cautious with her phone, but she wasn't exactly a tech genius. One night, while she was in the shower, I managed to guess her password and got in. What I found made my heart sink. There were dozens of messages between her and Nick. They were flirty, explicit, and full of plans to meet up. It was clear this wasn't just some innocent friendship. I screenshotted everything and sent it to my email. I felt sick to my stomach, but also strangely relieved to finally know the truth. It was devastating, but at least I wasn't going crazy. I decided to bide my time and wait for the right moment to confront her. A few days later, Jessica told me she had to work late again. I didn't let on that I knew, but I decided this was the night I'd catch her red-handed. I followed her after she left the house, and, predictably, she met up with Nick. They drove around for a while before parking in a dark, secluded area. I parked a little distance away and watched as they moved to the back seat of the taxi. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking, but I knew I had to see this through. I quietly approached the car, and through the fogged-up windows, saw them in the throes of passion. It felt like a punch to the gut. I snapped a few photos as evidence. My heart was racing, and I felt a mix of rage and heartbreak that I can't even begin to describe. I went back to my car, took a few deep breaths, and tried to calm myself down before going back home. When Jessica finally came home, she was all smiles, acting like nothing was wrong. It took everything in me to not explode right then and there. I asked her how her night was, and she gave me some bullshit story about working on a presentation. I nodded along, pretending to buy her lies, all the while feeling my anger simmering just beneath the surface. The next morning, I told her I had to leave early for a work meeting. Instead, I went straight to a lawyer's office. I laid everything out, the messages, the photos, and my plan to file for divorce. The lawyer was sympathetic and assured me we had a strong case. When I got back home, Jessica was still in bed. I sat down at the kitchen table and took a moment to steel myself. Then I called her into the living room. "Jessica, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady but my hands trembling. She looked at me with a mix of confusion and annoyance, clearly not expecting this conversation. "What is it, Mike? I have to get ready for work," she replied, her tone dismissive. I took out my phone and showed her the screenshots of her messages with Nick. Her face went pale. She tried to grab the phone from me, but I pulled it back. "Don't even try to deny it," I said, my voice rising. "I followed you last night. I saw you with him." She started to cry, but it didn't move me. Her tears were nothing but a manipulation tactic, and I wasn't falling for it this time. "It's not what it looks like, Mike," she sobbed, but her words were empty. I took a deep breath and said, "Jessica, I'm filing for divorce. I can't do this anymore. You've been lying to me for months, and I can't live with someone I can't trust." Her demeanor changed instantly. The tears stopped and she became defensive, angry even. She started yelling, calling me paranoid, accusing me of spying on her and invading her privacy. It was almost surreal how quickly she flipped the script. "I knew you were always insecure, but this is a new low, Mike. Spying on me, following me, that's pathetic," she screamed, her face red with fury. I didn't respond to her insults. I just walked out of the room, grabbing my keys and heading out the door. I needed some air, some space to think. As I drove around aimlessly, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. I was hurt, yes, but I also felt a sense of freedom. For the first time in months, I knew what I had to do. This marriage was over, and it was time to move on. Things get even crazier from here. Things went from bad to worse, and the fallout was more explosive than I ever imagined. After I left the house, I drove around for a while, trying to clear my head. When I finally felt ready to face the mess at home, I returned to find Jessica packing a suitcase. She was on the phone with someone, probably Nick, and she was hysterical. As soon as she saw me, she hung up and started yelling again. "How could you do this to me, Mike? You've ruined everything." Her anger was palpable, but I didn't back down. "You did this to yourself, Jessica," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "You chose to cheat. You chose to lie." She scoffed and continued packing, throwing clothes into her suitcase haphazardly. "You were never there for me. You were always working, always busy with your own life. What did you expect me to do?" I couldn't believe she was trying to pin this on me. "Don't try to make this my fault. You could have talked to me. You could have told me you were unhappy, but instead, you decided to screw around behind my back." Jessica ignored me and continued packing. "I'm leaving. I'm going to stay with Nick." The mention of his name made my blood boil, but I kept my cool. "Fine, leave. But understand this, Jessica. We're done. I don't want to see you or hear from you again." She slammed her suitcase shut and stormed out of the house. As she drove away, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. This chapter of my life was over, but the pain of betrayal still lingered. Over the next few days, I focused on getting my affairs in order. I contacted my lawyer and started the divorce proceedings. I changed the locks on the house and removed Jessica from all our joint accounts. I was determined to move on, no matter how difficult it was. A week later, I received a call from Jessica. She was crying, begging me to take her back. "Mike, I made a mistake. I was confused. Please, can we talk?" I was taken aback by her sudden change of heart, but I knew better than to trust her again. "Jessica, there's nothing to talk about. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." She continued to plead, but I stood firm. "I can't do this anymore. I've already started the divorce process. It's over." Jessica's tears quickly turned to anger. You're going to regret this, Mike. You can't just throw away 6 years of marriage like this. I hung up, not wanting to hear any more of her manipulative tactics. I knew I had made the right decision, but that didn't make it any easier. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyer meetings, paperwork, and trying to get my life back on track. Jessica continued to call and text, swinging between begging for forgiveness and hurling insults at me. I blocked her number, needing space to heal and move forward. Then, out of the blue, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Nick. "Hi, I'm Nick. Mike, we need to talk," he said, his voice strained. "It's about Jessica." I didn't want to hear anything he had to say, but curiosity got the better of me. "What do you want, Nick?" "Jessica's been lying to both of us," he said, his voice shaky. "She's been seeing someone else besides me." I was stunned. "What are you talking about? She played us both, man. She was with another guy the whole time. I found out last night. She admitted everything." I didn't know what to say. Jessica's betrayal ran even deeper than I had realized. "I don't care anymore, Nick. She's your problem now," he sighed. "I just thought you should know. I'm sorry for everything." I hung up, feeling a strange sense of vindication. Jessica's true colors were finally out in the open, and she had no one to blame but herself. Navigating the divorce was a wild ride. After filing for divorce, the reality of my situation really started to hit me. I was ending a 6-year marriage, and no matter how much Jessica had hurt me, the process was still daunting and emotional. My lawyer, Mark, was a no-nonsense kind of guy, and he assured me we had a strong case given the evidence of Jessica's infidelity. We started with the paperwork, which was a mountain of forms and legal jargon. Mark walked me through each step, making sure I understood what I was signing and what to expect. I provided all the evidence I had, the screenshots of messages, the photos of her and Nick, and even the receipts that showed her lies. It was all laid out in black and white, and there was no denying the truth. The next step was serving Jessica with the divorce papers. Mark hired a process server to handle it, and I made sure I wasn't home when it happened. I didn't want to deal with her immediate reaction. Later that evening, my phone blew up with calls and texts from her. I ignored them all. The first court date was set a few weeks later. In the meantime, Jessica tried everything to get me to talk to her. She called, she texted, she even showed up at my workplace once, causing a scene. My boss had to ask her to leave. It was embarrassing and frustrating, but I held firm. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. On the day of the hearing, I was a bundle of nerves. I arrived early and met with Mark outside the courtroom. He briefed me on what to expect and reassured me that we were in a strong position. When Jessica arrived, she looked disheveled and stressed. She avoided eye contact with me, and I could see the tension written all over her face. The hearing was straightforward. Mark presented our evidence, and Jessica's lawyer tried to downplay her actions, suggesting that our marital issues were mutual and that her infidelity was a symptom, not the cause. It was infuriating to hear, but Mark countered every point with calm precision. Jessica was called to the stand, and watching her squirm under questioning was a strange mix of satisfying and sad. She tried to paint herself as a victim, claiming she felt neglected and unloved. When Mark asked her about the explicit messages and photos, she broke down in tears, admitting to the affair, but insisting it was a mistake. The judge was not impressed. He pointed out that infidelity is a serious breach of trust, and that Jessica's actions had directly led to the breakdown of our marriage. He also noted that I had provided ample evidence to support my claims. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I told the court how Jessica's betrayal had blindsided me, how I had discovered her affair, and how it had shattered my trust in her. I also mentioned her erratic and hysterical behavior after being confronted, which further highlighted her manipulative tendencies. After several hours, the judge ruled in my favor. The divorce was granted on the grounds of adultery, and I was awarded the house and most of our joint assets. Jessica was given a modest settlement, enough to get her back on her feet, but nothing more. The judge's decision felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. Justice had been served, and I could finally start to move on. With the divorce finalized, I focused on healing. I threw myself into work, started going to the gym more, and even picked up some old hobbies I had neglected. Friends and family were incredibly supportive, and their encouragement helped me get through the tough days. It wasn't easy, but I began to feel like myself again. The house, once filled with memories of our life together, slowly became a place of my own. I redecorated, moved things around, and made it a space where I could find peace and start anew. I was focusing on work, hitting the gym, and trying to move forward. One evening, a couple of months after everything had calmed down, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to pick up. "Hello," I answered, half expecting it to be a telemarketer. "Mike, it's Laura, Nick's wife." My heart skipped a beat. Laura and I had never met, but I knew about her through the mess with Jessica and Nick. I had assumed she was dealing with her own fallout, just like I had been. Hi Laura, what's going on? Can we meet? I think we need to talk." We arranged to meet at a local coffee shop. I was curious, but also a bit apprehensive. What could she possibly want to discuss? When I got there, Laura was already seated, looking more composed than I felt. "Thanks for meeting with me," she said, offering a small smile. "Sure. What's this about?" I asked, taking a seat across from her. Laura took a deep breath. "I wanted to tell you something about Nick and Jessica. I think it's important for you to know." I braced myself for more bad news. "Go on." "After I found out about Nick's affair with Jessica, I did some digging of my own. It turns out Jessica wasn't the only one. Nick has been seeing multiple women, all while pretending to be this charming, trustworthy guy. I felt a strange mix of anger and vindication. Figures. I always knew he was a sleazebag. But why tell me this now?" Laura's expression softened. "Because I found out something else. Nick has been using his position as a driver to find vulnerable women. Women who are unhappy in their marriages or relationships. He's been manipulating them, and Jessica was just one of his many victims." It was a lot to take in. "So you're saying he's a predator?" Laura nodded. "Yes, and I think he targeted Jessica because he sensed she was unhappy. I'm not excusing what she did, but I think it's important to understand that Nick played a big part in manipulating her." The revelation left me reeling. I had always blamed Jessica entirely for the affair, but now I was seeing another side of the story. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm taking Nick to court. I found other women willing to testify against him, and I think it would help to have you on board too. You don't have to do anything major, just provide your account of what happened." I thought about it for a moment. Getting involved in another legal battle wasn't something I was eager to do, but if it meant stopping Nick from hurting more people, it was worth considering. "I'll think about it," I said finally. Laura smiled, a genuine smile this time. "Thank you, Mike. I know it's a lot to ask, but I appreciate it." We parted ways, and I spent the next few days mulling over her request. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that helping Laura might give me a sense of closure. Nick had wreaked havoc on my life, and stopping him could help me move on for good. I decided to meet with Laura again and agreed to testify. We spent hours going over the details of what I knew, and she filled me in on the other women who were also coming forward. It was a twisted web of deceit and manipulation, and I was more determined than ever to see justice served. The case against Nick was set to go to court a few months later. In the meantime, I continued focusing on rebuilding my life. I started dating again, cautiously at first, but it felt good to connect with new people. I was honest about my past, and it was refreshing to find women who appreciated my honesty and resilience. As the court date approached, I prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation with Nick. I hadn't seen him since the divorce, and I wasn't looking forward to it. But when the day finally came, I felt surprisingly calm. The courtroom was tense as Laura's lawyer laid out the case against Nick. There were testimonies from multiple women, each one describing how he had used his charm and position to manipulate them. When it was my turn to speak, I recounted my experience, focusing on the impact his actions had on my marriage and my life. Nick sat there, looking smug and unapologetic. But as the testimonies piled up, his confidence began to waver. By the end of the trial, it was clear the judge was not buying his innocent act. Nick was found guilty of multiple counts of harassment and emotional abuse. He was sentenced to several years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to his victims. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it felt like justice. Seeing Nick led away in handcuffs was a moment of catharsis. It didn't erase the pain of what had happened, but it helped me close that chapter of my life. Laura and I stayed in touch, supporting each other through the aftermath. If you thought things were wild before, hold on tight because this part is all about sweet, calculated revenge. After the court case against Nick, I felt a sense of justice for the first time since discovering the affair. But there was still unfinished business with Jessica. She had shattered my trust and tried to ruin my life, and despite everything, I couldn't just let her walk away unscathed. I started planning my next move. I knew that revenge might not be the healthiest response, but I needed some form of closure. And honestly, seeing her face the consequences of her actions was something I felt she deserved. I started by gathering more dirt. Jessica had been careless during her affair, and there were plenty of loose ends. I combed through old emails, texts, and social media posts, looking for anything that could further expose her lies. It didn't take long to find what I needed. There were messages from other men, suggesting that Nick wasn't the only one she had been seeing. So Nick told me the truth when he called me. With this new ammunition, I decided to hit her where it would hurt the most: her reputation. Jessica had always been a social butterfly, loved by many for her outgoing and seemingly kind nature. Exposing her true colors to her friends, family, and colleagues would be devastating for her. I started by anonymously sending the incriminating messages to her closest friends and family. I'll be honest, I'm not proud of what I did, but at the time, I wanted to get back at her. What do you think? Did I do the right thing? I included screenshots and a brief explanation of her infidelities. The reactions were immediate and intense. Friends who had admired her were shocked and appalled, and her parents were deeply disappointed. I felt a pang of guilt, but reminded myself that she had brought this upon herself. Next, I turned my attention to her workplace. Jessica prided herself on her professional reputation, and I knew this would be a major blow. I sent an anonymous email to her boss and a few key colleagues, detailing her affair with Nick and providing evidence of her misconduct. I knew this could potentially cost her her job, but I didn't care. She had jeopardized my life, and it was time for her to face the consequences. The fallout was swift. Jessica was called into a meeting with HR and confronted with the evidence. She was suspended pending an investigation, and from what I heard through mutual contacts, her chances of keeping her job were slim. She called me, furious and desperate, but I ignored her calls. I had nothing left to say to her, but I wasn't done yet. There was one more person who needed to know the truth: Peter, a mutual friend of ours, who had always had a bit of a crush on Jessica. He was one of the few people who still seemed to support her after the initial wave of revelations. I invited him over for a drink, pretending I wanted to catch up and move past everything. When Peter arrived, I laid it all out for him. I showed him the messages, the photos, and told him everything I knew about Jessica's other affairs. He was devastated. He had believed her lies and stood by her, only to find out she had been using him just like everyone else. "I thought she loved me," Peter said, his voice breaking. "She doesn't love anyone but herself," I replied, trying to comfort him. "She's a master manipulator, and we were all pawns in her game." Peter thanked me for telling him the truth and left, looking like a man who had just had the wind knocked out of him. I felt a twinge of satisfaction, knowing that Jessica's web of lies was unraveling. In the days that followed, Jessica's life continued to fall apart. She was officially fired from her job, and her social circle shrank as more people learned about her deceit. She sent me a series of increasingly desperate messages, alternating between anger and begging for forgiveness. I didn't respond to any of them. Watching her suffer wasn't as satisfying as I'd imagined, but it did bring me a sense of closure. Eventually, Jessica moved out of town, unable to face the people who now saw her for who she truly was. Just when I thought things were finally settling down, Jessica decided to strike back in the most underhanded way possible. After I exposed Jessica's affairs and she left town in disgrace, I felt like I had finally gotten some closure. Life was slowly getting back to normal, and I was focused on rebuilding. But Jessica wasn't done with me yet. A few months after she left, I started noticing strange things happening. Bills and subscriptions that I didn't recognize began to pile up. Credit cards that I hadn't applied for arrived in the mail. It didn't take long for me to realize that someone had stolen my identity. I immediately suspected Jessica. She had access to all my personal information during our marriage, and it seemed like the kind of petty revenge she would seek. I contacted my lawyer and a financial advisor to start sorting out the mess. As we dug deeper, it became clear that Jessica had been opening accounts in my name and running up debts. She was also making fake social media profiles, posing as me, and posting inflammatory comments to ruin my reputation. It was a coordinated attack, designed to destroy my credit and my good name. I decided it was time to confront her directly. I had my lawyer draft a cease and desist letter, and we sent it to her last known address. I also filed a police report and started the process of disputing the fraudulent charges on my accounts. But Jessica didn't stop. She escalated her efforts, making threatening phone calls and sending anonymous hate mail to my office. My coworkers started receiving messages that accused me of all sorts of vile behavior, all fabricated by Jessica. One day, I came home to find my front yard vandalized. Spray-painted words like cheater and liar covered my fence and driveway. I called the police, but without concrete evidence that Jessica was behind it, there wasn't much they could do. Feeling desperate, I decided to hire a private investigator to gather proof of Jessica's actions. It didn't take long for the investigator to find her. She was living a few towns over, under a new name, but still up to her old tricks. The investigator managed to get photos of her making the threatening phone calls and sending the hate mail. Armed with this evidence, I went back to the police and my lawyer. We filed for a restraining order, and I initiated legal action against Jessica for identity theft, harassment, and defamation. The court granted the restraining order, and Jessica was served with the legal papers. But Jessica didn't take the news well. She tried to play the victim, claiming that I was persecuting her out of spite. However, the mountain of evidence against her made it clear who the real culprit was. In court, Jessica's lies and manipulations were exposed. The judge ruled in my favor, ordering her to cease all contact with me, pay restitution for the damages she had caused, and undergo mandatory counseling. It was a small victory, but it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. With Jessica legally barred from contacting me and my identity finally secured, I started the long process of repairing my credit and reputation. It wasn't easy, but knowing that Jessica could no longer torment me made it worthwhile. Back with the final part of this crazy journey. After all the drama, pain, and upheaval, I finally found a path to peace and a future worth looking forward to. I threw myself into work, taking on new projects and responsibilities. My colleagues, who had seen me at my lowest, were incredibly supportive. They rallied around me, helping me rebuild my professional standing. With their encouragement, I started to see progress. But work wasn't everything. I knew I needed to rebuild my personal life too. I started going to therapy, which helped me process the trauma and betrayal I'd experienced. My therapist was fantastic, guiding me through my emotions and helping me understand that it was okay to feel hurt, angry, and even vengeful, but that it was also important to let go and move forward. One of the biggest steps in moving forward was reconnecting with old friends and making new ones. I started attending social events, joined a local sports league, and even took up some old hobbies I had neglected, like hiking and photography. It felt good to be active and engaged with the world again. About 6 months after everything had settled, I met someone new. Her name was Sarah, and we met through mutual friends at a dinner party. Sarah was kind, intelligent, and had a great sense of humor. We hit it off immediately, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of hope and excitement. Sarah and I took things slow. We went on casual dates, got to know each other, and built a strong foundation of trust and respect. She knew about my past and was incredibly understanding and supportive. With her, I felt safe and valued, something I hadn't felt in a long time. As our relationship grew, so did my confidence. Sarah and I talked openly about our hopes and dreams, and I realized I was ready to build a future with someone new. I told her everything about Jessica, the revenge and the aftermath. Instead of being scared off, Sarah admired my resilience and determination to overcome such a difficult period. One sunny afternoon, Sarah and I were hiking up a beautiful trail overlooking a valley. As we reached the summit, we sat down to take in the view. It was breathtaking, and in that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace and contentment. "Mike," Sarah said, taking my hand, "I'm so glad we met. You've been through so much, and yet you're one of the kindest, strongest people I know." I smiled, squeezing her hand. "I'm glad we met too, Sarah. You've helped me find happiness again." As we sat there talking about our future, I realized how far I had come. The pain and betrayal of the past were still there, but they no longer defined me. I had learned to forgive myself for the mistakes I had made and to let go of the anger towards Jessica. She was a chapter in my life that had ended, and now it was time to write new ones. A few months later, Sarah and I decided to move in together. We found a cozy apartment in the city, filled it with our favorite things, and started building a life together. It wasn't always easy, but with each other's support, we faced every challenge head-on. I continued to thrive at work, taking on leadership roles and mentoring new employees. My reputation was restored, and I felt proud of the career I had built. Outside of work, I volunteered at a local shelter, giving back to the community that had supported me through my darkest times. One evening, as Sarah and I were sitting on our balcony watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, "Mike, I love you. I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished. You've shown me what it means to be resilient and to never give up." I pulled her close, feeling a warmth in my heart that I hadn't felt in years. "I love you too, Sarah. You've brought so much joy and love into my life. I can't wait to see what the future holds for us." As we sat there, I realized that the journey I had been on was more than just about overcoming betrayal and finding revenge. It was about rediscovering myself, finding inner strength, and learning to open my heart again. Life isn't always fair, and people can be cruel, but it's how we choose to respond to those challenges that define us. I chose to move forward, to find happiness, and to build a future filled with love and hope. Subscribe to my channel for updates.